ahead.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, David Spink, consultant to a number of First Nations in the oil sands area. My question relates to monitoring design and the issues of scale, uncertainty, desired change detectability limits, and most importantly, stakeholder engagement in establishing scale, acceptable levels of uncertainty, desired level of detectability. And I would submit that in oil sands development, unless you have meaningful engagement with Aboriginal communities that are living with these impacts, use the land, that, as Dr. Hansen said, your programs are not going to have credibility. So my question is, how have your existing programs incorporated Aboriginal engagement, or how would you see them on a go-forward basis incorporating Aboriginal engagement to inform those issues of scale, acceptable levels of uncertainty, what indicator species they want to see looked at?
Okay, good. That's a great cross-sector question, so maybe we can have a number of you all try and answer that if you don't mind. So.
Yeah, I'll take that one. Aboriginal engagement, having the folks who are affected by decisions as well as those who affect decision making, to me, is a fundamental part of what we're trying to do here. I think that it needs to be taken very, very seriously and have dedicated resources. It is something that we tagged way back when we released the federal plan. And to me, it is nothing I wanted to take on in a trivial manner. So in my former lives, where I've worked on projects that have involved a TEK or Aboriginal engagement, there have been dedicated professors who have worked for many years. There has been a dedicated effort to identify the natural leaders, to know who to talk to understand community dynamics. It just, the depth of the difficulty there for us to do this properly was nothing I wanted to do with half measures. So I certainly think that we can be criticized that way. I think I like the philosophy that I saw in the Pacific Northwest in that spotted owl plan, where they said, do this incrementally. Set out your questions and start. And I feel like if I view this as an incremental effort that we're just starting, then now I feel like, okay, so we've got something, we've got a basis. How does that conversation roll out? And we've had a lot of fits and starts, and we have dedicated folks now working on that aspect. And so I'm happy to see the advice they have on the way we go about this intelligently. But I'm looking for that advice on how to do this.
And I would just add that within the biodiversity working group in the oil sands, we've identified an initiative to interact with stakeholders, First Nations and others that live and work in the area. And that is a piece that Amira is presently trying to position so they can move forward effectively. My gut tells me we will make some strides in that in the next 2, 3, 4 months. But it's a difficult issue to tackle, and folks are approaching it cautiously, approaching it, trying to do as good a job as they can rather than jumping in and hope something happens.
Okay. A few others? Yep.
Yeah, David, I don't know if you were addressing that to me, but I think in WBA we've lived and breathed it. You in particular in Fort McKay from the foundation of this organization have been absolutely instrumental in designs and putting concerns forward. But at the higher level, I think it's a matter of really, you have to listen, you have to respect, And you have to go to the communities. In our case, they're part of us, and you know, it's almost a weekly occurrence. We're dealing with one Aboriginal community or another. You have to ask them what are their concerns. I don't think a bunch of scientists designing top-down projects and then hoping that somehow TEK is going to fit in on that is the way to go. I think it has to come from the ground up, and the monitoring has to address community concerns and address their needs. So that's just what I have to say anyway.
Good?
No, yeah, I'd echo that for sure. And I think one of the things that with wildlife and wildlife health, wildlife contaminants, obviously there's an interest, an intense interest in the data that we're generating. So we spend a lot of time interacting with community members. We go to the communities, and the other thing that we do is we go to the communities to report out results and to get a check on the program and what we're doing. We also have got a lot of inroads now with community-based monitoring programs, and I think that's a very effective way of co-monitoring. And you get checks from that, and you say you get to explain why, say, the species that we're working with, we are working with, and it's a good way to sort of discuss the program and to explain maybe why the species that we've selected are the ones that we're working with. So it's a lot of outreach, it's a lot of talking, and it's a lot of going out to meet people in the communities to explain what we're doing and to get ideas, basically.
Okay. All right. Good. Everybody else? Right. All right. Over to this one here.
Yes, Alan Legg with Wood Buffalo. My question is somewhat general, but I think Bill from ABMI can probably answer this question. How do you choose your critters, your indicators, and how do you know that they're the best ones? And if you have change, can you interpret the cause of that change? Or is it just more or less accounting, and the counts change from assessment to assessment?
So within the ABMI, when we were choosing the things to monitor, I didn't put a slide up. In hindsight, I guess I should have. We said, rather than trying to identify the indicator, that magical 1 or 4 or 24 things to monitor that will tell us the answer, we'll go for breadth. We don't have any idea what the 24 things are anyways. I mean, each of the 24 doesn't cover the breadth. And we are almost for certain going to want to monitor different things in 50 years than we do today. What gives us the gall to think we're going to know what people want to monitor in 50 years? So instead of trying to go for specificity, we went for breadth and saying, if we get enough of a different breadth, of the breadth, we will then have things that if they change, we'll be able to detect that. And we will have the breadth of things that folks will be interested today and in the future. So instead of going for specificity, we went for breadth, and that's why the program it has the breadth that it has in it. When talking about the ability to attribute change, much of the targeted sampling that we do is to build these models. And think of it as mining data. If you have data that's collected in a random fashion or in a fashion that samples the environment in a way that isn't biased, when one analyzes the data and looks for patterns, the pattern then tells you what the potential cause is. And I stress the word potential. In a retrospective study, a sample of the environment, it is a potential cause. It isn't a known cause. The only way to get a known cause is to then sample in the future or to design some sort of monitoring that allows you to evaluate as you move down the road. You say, well, if that potential cause is true, then these 4 other things should happen and we should be able to detect them. But the initial study is, we call it associations. It's about potential causes rather than actual causes. But if one implements a monitoring program that goes for a long period of time, we can prove up many of those potential causes. And what I think is even neater is we can stimulate other folks to look at the potential causes and see whether they are real causes. And that's the interaction with folks that are doing real research or doing cause and effect studies, manipulations. That's an important part of monitoring. It's got to feed through to not just looking for patterns, but stimulating folks to do other things as well.
Any other comments on indicators and something from? Okay.
So this is just kind of a general thoughts, statement, and then a question for kind of the panel as a whole. Throughout yesterday's presentations and throughout today's, I've enjoyed the science. I love hearing what's going on and what's actually being done, some of the results when they don't go over my head. But really, what I always look for is the so what factor. So with a lot of the presentations, I've kind of seen, you know, some great results, and here's what we're doing, but so what does it mean? So if you find arsenic in the water, what does it mean? Does it mean something for industry? Does it mean something for policy change? What does it mean? How is it meaningful? I have arsenic in my blood. So what does arsenic in the water mean? So that's one thing that I always try to find in presentations, and I didn't see a lot yesterday. I've seen a bit more today. So I guess I would urge all the presenters and all the scientists and researchers to kind of think about that, especially when you're designing research methodologies and research frameworks, is to think about the so what. What's the end result? What's the end goal of my work? How is it going to feed into policy? How am I going to translate that into action and into actual change? And is it going to be meaningful? So that's kind of just an overall comment. So I guess the question for the panel is, from some of your conclusions, is there any nuggets of so what that you could pull out just maybe from one of your conclusions? Is there something that you've really thought about in terms of, so what does this actually mean? I've concluded this, I've found this, what does it mean, and how might that impact or institute change? I know that's kind of a big, broad question, but
It's a good question.
it's been on my mind.
I guess one of the things, I've been working on a lot of different projects for the last 4 years, and I think one of the biggest sort of aha moments for me has been just recently working on the project I talked about today. And we did this work as, you know, it's correlational work and it's quite exploratory, but it really, to me, it really points to the importance of not discounting the importance of interactions, because if we don't understand them, we are not going to effectively manage them. And so I'm not sure that means that I can answer the question, but it certainly means that it points in the direction of more questions and the need for better understanding in order to come up with proper management and conservation for boreal birds. So sometimes I don't think we always get the answers, we just get more questions. And that's not a bad thing either.
Anybody else? I think we should have a couple of you respond to that if we could.
The one other thing that I've noticed as we start looking at patterns within the data is that scale really counts. What one finds at one scale does not necessarily translate into the next scale, either up or down. And as one gets more information collected in a variety of different ways, or at least at a variety of different spatial scales or temporal scales, the ability to think through what it means from an ecological perspective or from a management perspective, it's just richer. And that scale information, I think, is something that we as people grapple with. We struggle to figure out what is the difference between local scale and landscape scale, and we struggle to think about how to manage things over decades or centuries.
Anybody else? Bruce, you want to?
I guess from a wildlife toxicology point of view, the so what question is basically what we're trying to establish. And if you're thinking of using the species that we're working with in a risk assessment type of manner, we look at exposure and we look at effects. And we're still establishing exposure in the field. And where we have effects-based information, then we could start to address that question. Okay, so we have this measure of whatever it is, arsenic pHs in the environment, in the wetlands, in this frog habitat. So what does that mean? Well, if we have good effects-based information, we could say, well, there may be impacts on the populations living there. And you have to have a good link between the species you're working with, data for that individual species, so you can make that that conclusion in a good manner. So the so what questions, I think, will be, we're still at the stage where we're establishing the baselines of contaminant levels in the region, and we will start to be able to address the so what questions when we've done the required work on the toxicity end of things to say, so what does that concentration mean?
Simon, I saw you grab the microphone. Did you want to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I can add a few things to that. And I think it points to the long-term trend monitoring that, we're hoping to do. And so the so what for ungulate populations is having a survey design that's reliable enough to track these populations over time, which is important for management purposes, but also for biodiversity. So I think using improved technologies and having a long-term monitoring program is important to monitor these populations.
Okay. All right. Over this side.
So I don't disagree with what I've heard. I mean, I do understand that JOSM is effects-based monitoring program, and you need to identify what the changes are and if those changes matter, and then you work till cause. But if causal associations, because this is the oil sands monitoring program, if causal associations are going to take 10 years, that's too long. That's just too long. So we need to get, and I understand the complexities of scale, and it really is dependent on the endpoint, the species that you're working with, but we do need to get to the so what question for the indicators that we can sooner rather than later. So for the ones that we can get to causal associations for it now, let's have the process to identify that. So I'm hoping this time next year where there's a forum, we, as the regulator, we have things that we can examine and we can work with industry on to move forward. Right now, I'm not seeing that, and I don't want to wait 10 years for that to happen. So I encourage you to really push that so what question for the indicators that we can.
Just the next question over there. Or if anybody wanted to respond to that, or no, I mean, you don't.
Yeah, well, I'm looking at Jim because I actually want to prompt him, but so maybe I'll do a leading question. But so the trend monitoring, yeah, will take 10, 15 years. It'll take us a while to get there, especially where we don't have long-term programs. But these models, the types of models that we're talking about, these are very powerful. These are exactly the types of things that we can apply now. So if there is agreed upon scenarios, such as, the land use framework, for example, of, what are the range of plausible scenarios, we can tell you, are your species at risk going to go up or down? We can apply that now, but, and I know some of those conversations are ongoing with the biodiversity framework and those triggers and getting these models in there. But I don't want you to think that you have to wait 10 years because I think regulators can define what are those scenarios or policy, and that Lisa's nodding. That's a good sign. When Lisa nods, that's good. We can figure that out. So we're not there for everything. And Jim, maybe I'll let you step up from there.
I just assumed it was a rhetorical question. So, and I agree. I mean, I don't think we want to have. We want to, as a society, have to wait for long periods to get answers. The relationships that have been developed by all of us on the panel here, they're real relationships. They're based on real data collected in the system that we're working in the system that we want to manage. Those relationships may not be, they're not the science cause and effect. We didn't manipulate them to find that relationship. But there's every reason to believe that most of those relationships are real. I mean, I did a scan about maybe 7 or 8 years ago of the literature on looking at how one described patterns of wildlife. And over 70% of the studies in the scientific literature are based on association. They're not based on cause and effect. They're based on association from sampling the environment in a retrospective analysis. That's what we do. That's what virtually everybody talked about here today, although, Bruce, some of your stuff may have more of a of a causal relationship in that some of your studies may have been manipulated per se. But most of it is this retrospective analysis. But those patterns are real. I mean, if we see the species going up, or the pesticides going up, or the chemicals going up, they're going up because there is the association in the environments we study. That's real, and we can manage it today. If we want to understand more of the gory details, it will require some studies, and they will take more time. But we can react today.
I just want to add one thing, in that I totally agree with what Jim is saying, that, you know, we have belief in these models. I mean, they are models, so they are our representations of the world, but they are based on empirical data. And you can use those models with credibility and with confidence and apply them to future landscapes. And that has real power and meaning. I've done that type of work with ALPAC, and it's really meaningful and really useful to project into the future 10, 20, 50, 100 years and look at, under different scenarios, what will happen to the world. And that means you don't have to wait to find out 10 or 20 years what you think will happen.
Good. Up here, and then we'll go over to the side. So.
Brian Fuchs, I'm a consultant with Matrix. Kind of a comment and then a two-part question, I guess. My recognition was that one of the common objectives in some of those presentations is around studying population level effects of different species. Understanding that at the same time, each individual oil sands operator has their own obligations to monitor wildlife at their project site, and that some of those programs have been going on for 5-10 years. So I guess the question was, did you guys have access to that information that's being collected on a project-specific basis, and was there a way to make use of that in your studies? And then I guess also, are there plans in the future to try and better align some of the regional level work you're doing with the individual project by project type monitoring that is ongoing and I presume will continue to be ongoing?
Well, I'm working on Bryan Energy's Mackay River commercial project lease area right now, and I actually am working with Jonah Kime at Matrix Solutions out of the Edmonton office. He's been leading with Cindy Robinson at Bryan Energy the collection of landscape level bird monitoring data, sort of at a big landscape scale within the lease area, and I've been focusing some work on really local scale work on both communities and on focal species. So we are working directly with the operator using their regulatory data to compare to ours so that we can make comparisons between local and landscape and hopefully bridge some knowledge gaps.
And I think it applies way more broadly, is that everybody recognizes that dollars are scarce. That we have more desires than we have funding resources. So everybody is looking at how do we maximize the integration amongst the information that's collected in a variety of sources. I would like to say that we've crossed that bridge and it's all solved, but we haven't. On the other hand, I think we've made huge strides in the last few years, and it is a direction that almost everybody, I'd say everybody, is trying to work on.
All right, we'll go over to this mic here.
My name is Chi Chen. I'm working with Alberta Environment and Sustainable Resource Development. I just want to talk a bit on the issues about scaling up, scaling down things. I just want to encourage you to think a little bit outside the box. What happened is, we're really lucky. We have a lot of great scientists involved in monitoring and research of different environmental monitoring projects. I tend to look at the research is more to find the causes and the reasons and quantitative numerical relationships. And the monitoring is probably more on the casual side of associations, observation of general trends, rather than that naval vigorous approach in research. Saying that there, is probably very obvious. What happens is this would affect how we report data. A lot of people like to use the critical region approach in statistics to evaluate if something is significant or not, greater than 5%, less than 5%, you use as a cutoff. For research, it's probably very well justified. For monitoring, I think it's probably, a little bit too conservative, because basically the 10% difference could be a very big difference too for your probability about the outcome based on your monitoring. Because of that, I like to see a bit more of your reporting using probability approach when you assess your hypothesis, rather than just critical region approach, for the reason of what monitoring is about. The second thing I like to see is really when you design your hypothesis, lot of research work, you like to really break it down to as much as possible to be able to assess the effect of a pure factor. You want to reach to the conclusion, reach to that factor as pure as possible. That's probably the nature of analytical science and approach and philosophy we use in dealing with research. With a lot of these socio-economical issues, a lot of the questions really related to one another. It's the pattern, it's a combination of treatments that really matter, rather than just one single treatment, rather than one single factor.
Okay.
Therefore, I'd like to see your hypotheses be more, less scaled down. Scale them as close as possible to real questions. Therefore, when you apply your results or you do tech transfer, you don't need to scale up that too much, because there are so many things can be missed in the step of scaling down, scaling up.
Okay.
Use more treatment combinations. Use more combinations of vegetation and soil together. Use more combination of sediments and the water body together.
Okay, so the probability and then also the scalability. Does anybody
Yeah.
want to?
So any comment? I just encourage you. I could be wrong.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. I actually have been paying attention, and I've been quiet. There have been a lot of questions that I think have been revolving around the same theme, and that is how much is enough? And I think what we're really still missing is clearly articulated policy questions. I've seen a lot of monitoring programs, Canada, Europe, wherever else, where the business of simply doing the monitoring becomes more important than the answers and the endpoint you're trying to achieve. It just becomes a cycle of, oh, it's April again, we've got to go and collect, we've got to go and sample these 25 lakes, just go and do it, and then 5 years later, what are we going to do with all this data? And geez, why do we collect it? Who's using it? So the example I'll use is the air Component Advisory Committee under Jocelyn. And I showed some of the objectives, and Mike and others did. Those really, I mean, they're objectives. We want you to do some status and trends. Well, okay, we're already doing that, but why are we doing it? What's the policy question that the regulator, industry, stakeholders, what are the questions that we really should be centering our work around so that we can be more scientifically literate? I mean, as scientists, I like to believe I'm still one, although I retired the first time about 8 years ago. We've done a pretty lousy job about being scientifically literate, and then we sit around and gripe about, oh, geez, there's no funding anymore, and nobody's funding us. And if the regulators could clearly articulate, and Amira could, stakeholder, what are the questions that we're really structuring this monitoring to answer? And then how long will it take up front to get enough of an answer? Is it 3, is it 5 years? Forget about the long-term trends. We have to go for those, but surely after a number of years, we'll have at least a partial answer that can guide and help answer the policy question. I've just seen too many monitoring programs where the business becomes all-consuming, and then 10 years down the road, you wonder why you're still collecting, and gee, nobody's really accessing the data. I'm not saying that'll be the case here, but I think Amira has an opportunity in the next 6 months or so to really tackle this, and I think they should. I mean, as Dr. Hansen said it's $15 million, a lot of money, and the feds are only spending 500. Well, you know, we've had a lot of research questions, we've had a lot of objectives, but we're still missing the really key policy questions that I think that it's decision makers and policymakers that have to pose those, and we as scientists have to take them seriously and listen.
Okay. Good summary comment maybe to end that up. So it's 1:30 now to make sure we get through the heavy metals and then the pollutants there. I think we'll stop, but there's no one else at the microphone. So a round of applause again for the presenters. Good.